The massive glass doors of the Galactic Academy slid open with a soft hiss, and Jake Morrison stepped into what looked like the inside of a giant crystal. The walls sparkled with colors he didn't have names for, and the ceiling stretched so high he couldn't see the top. His boots echoed on the smooth floor as he walked forward, a single human backpack on his shoulders, looking tiny compared to the floating cargo pods and mechanical limbs carrying luggage around him. Jake had dreamed about this moment for years. Earth had finally been accepted into the Galactic Education Exchange, and after months of tests, interviews, and medical checks, he was the lucky one chosen to represent humanity. The problem was, nobody here seemed particularly impressed by that fact. A group of tall, blue-skinned students, with 4 arms each, stopped their conversation to stare at him. One of them pointed and said something in a language that sounded like musical chimes. They all laughed, a sound like wind through metal tubes. Jake kept walking, his smile never wavering. The academy was bigger than any building on Earth. Students floated, crawled, rolled, and walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Some looked almost human, just with different colored skin or extra eyes. Others were so alien that Jake had to resist the urge to stare. A creature that looked like a walking tree passed by, its bark-like skin rustling as it moved. Behind it floated what appeared to be a cloud of glowing gas with tentacles. Jake found his assigned dormitory after getting lost twice and asking for directions from a helpful student who looked like a giant butterfly. The door recognized his presence and slid open to reveal a room that was definitely not designed with humans in mind. The ceiling was about 20 feet high, and his bed looked like a small platform in the corner. Sitting on what must have been the other bed was his roommate. Thok was built like a small mountain. His skin looked like granite, gray and rough, with cracks running through it that glowed faintly orange, like lava, deep underground. He stood about 8 feet tall, even while sitting down, and his arms were thicker than Jake's entire body. When he turned to look at Jake, his eyes were like 2 burning coals. "So you're the human," Thok said, his voice sounding like rocks grinding together in an earthquake. He stood up, and Jake had to crane his neck back to meet his gaze. "I expected you to be bigger, much bigger." Jake dropped his pack and walked over, holding out his hand with a friendly smile. "Jake Morrison, great to meet you, roommate." Thok stared down at the outstretched hand like Jake was offering him a dead insect. His massive head, which looked like someone had carved a face into a boulder, tilted to one side. "What are you doing with your appendage?" "It's called a handshake," Jake explained, still holding his hand out. "It's how humans greet each other." "Your grip strength must be pathetic," Thok rumbled, but he reached out one finger and tapped Jake's hand briefly. "How do you even lift things on your soft little world? Do you have machines do everything for you?" Before Jake could answer, their door chimed and slid open again. More students crowded into the doorway, clearly curious about the human. Jake recognized some of the species from his preparation materials, but others were completely new to him. Kree pushed to the front of the group. He looked like a 7-foot-tall lizard walking upright, with scales that shifted color from green to purple as he moved. His yellow eyes had vertical pupils, and when he spoke, Jake could see a forked tongue, flicking between sharp teeth. "Humans come from such a gentle planet," Kree said, his voice having a hissing quality that made every S sound last twice as long. "Low radiation, moderate temperatures, breathable atmosphere. How boring. How do you even develop any strength or intelligence when everything is handed to you?" A shimmering form near the back of the group spoke up. It looked like she was made of colorful gas held together by some kind of energy field. Her voice sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Must be nice living in paradise," she said, her form flickering with what Jake was beginning to realize was amusement. "Perfect weather, no real predators, abundant food and water everywhere. No wonder your species is so delicate and weak." More students pressed closer, and Jake could hear them whispering to each other in dozens of different languages. The translations came through his earpiece in a jumbled mess of comments about his size, his apparent frailty, and speculation about whether humans were actually intelligent or just looked that way. "I heard they can't even see in the dark," whispered a student that looked like a giant praying mantis. "And they only live for like 80 rotations," added another that resembled a walking cactus. "How can they learn anything useful in such a short time? Look how thin his skin is," observed a creature covered in what looked like metal plates. "You could probably cut him just by touching him wrong." Jake stood there in the middle of it all, surrounded by beings that could probably tear him apart without effort, listening to them discuss his weaknesses like he wasn't even there. Any normal person might have felt intimidated or angry. Instead, Jake just kept smiling that easy, friendly smile. He'd heard much worse during the selection process back on Earth. The human military commanders who'd interviewed him had called him everything from cannon fodder to diplomatic sacrifice. The scientists had questioned whether sending any human into space was worth the risk. Even his own family had worried he was too soft, too normal, too unremarkable to represent their entire species. But Jake had a secret that none of these aliens knew about yet. Something that the Earth's selection committee had recognized, even if they hadn't fully understood it themselves. Jake Morrison was the most aggressively, stubbornly, impossibly human person they could find, and that was going to make all the difference. Jake had been at the Galactic Academy for 3 weeks, and honestly, it was going better than expected. Sure, most of his classmates still treated him like he might break if they looked at him too hard, but at least they'd stopped openly laughing when he walked into a room. Progress was progress. That's when Professor Glix made his announcement that would change everything. Professor Glix looked like someone had crossed an octopus with a tree. His 8 thick tentacles served as both arms and legs, and his bulbous head was covered in what Jake had learned were actually sensory organs, not just weird bumps. When he got excited about something, which happened a lot during his atmospheric science lectures, all his tentacles would start waving around like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. Today, they were waving more than usual. "Class," Professor Glix announced, his tentacles practically dancing with enthusiasm. "We're going on a field trip. Pack your environmental suits. We're visiting Kepler 44 to see." The classroom erupted in excited chatter. Kepler 442c was legendary among atmospheric science students. It was a moon that orbited a gas giant in the outer rim, and it had some of the most violent weather in the known galaxy. For students studying extreme atmospheres, it was like getting to visit the most dangerous theme park ever created. Jake raised his hand. "Professor, what exactly makes this moon so special?" All the tentacles stopped waving and pointed at Jake. "Excellent question, young human. Kepler 442c experiences methane storms unlike anywhere else in the galaxy. The atmospheric pressure is 12 times what most species consider survivable, and the storms themselves are magnificent. Hurricane-force winds carrying liquid methane at temperatures that would freeze most substances solid." Thok, who had warmed up to Jake over the past few weeks, leaned over and whispered, "It's perfectly safe, though. The research vessel has military-grade shields and life support. Plus we'll all be in environmental suits the whole time." The day of the field trip, Jake stood in the equipment bay watching his classmates suit up. The environmental suits looked like something between medieval armor and a spacesuit. They were bulky, reinforced, and designed to keep absolutely everything out. Jake's suit had been specially modified for human physiology, which mostly meant it was about half the size of everyone else's. "Looking good, little human," Kree hissed as he checked his suit seals. Over the weeks, his teasing had become almost friendly. Almost. Try not to get lost in there. The research vessel was impressive, built more like a military ship than a school bus. As they launched from the Academy's docking bay, Jake pressed his face to the viewport, and watched the stars wheel by, even after 3 weeks in space. The view still took his breath away. Professor Glix's voice came over the intercom as they approached their destination. Students, observe the atmospheric readings on your displays. Notice how the methane concentration increases as we descend. The storms you see below us contain winds exceeding 400 kilometers per hour. Jake looked out at Kepler 44 to see, and felt his stomach drop. The moon looked angry. Massive orange and red clouds swirled across its surface like a living thing, shot through, with electrical storms that made Earth's lightning look like camera flashes. The whole atmosphere seemed to be constantly churning, never still, never calm. Remember, Professor Glix continued, his tentacles gripping the safety rails as the ship began to shake from atmospheric turbulence. This moon's atmosphere is highly corrosive. The storms can reach temperatures of -200 degrees Celsius, and the methane concentration would dissolve most organic compounds instantly. That's why we maintain a safe distance and rely on our instruments. The ship shuddered as they entered the upper atmosphere. Through the viewports, Jake watched swirling, orange clouds crackling with electrical storms that made the aurora borealis look like a nightlight. The beauty was terrifying and amazing at the same time. That's when everything went wrong. The first sign was a sound Jake had never heard before, a grinding, tearing noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ship's lights flickered, and suddenly, everyone was being thrown against their restraints as the vessel lurched sideways. What was that? Eth's gaseous form flickered with alarm, then the proximity alarms started screaming. Not the gentle chime that meant pay attention, but the harsh, urgent wail that meant you're about to die. Hull breach in sectors 7 through 12. The pilot's voice cracked over the intercom, and Jake could hear the panic, barely held in check. We're losing atmospheric integrity. All students, prepare for emergency landing procedures. Landing. Thok's rocky features showed confusion. We're supposed to be staying in orbit. We're going down. The pilot shouted, and suddenly Jake understood that this wasn't a landing at all. This was a crash. The ship spun like a broken toy, and through the spinning viewports, Jake caught glimpses of the moon's surface, rushing up to meet them. The methane storms that had looked so beautiful from a distance now looked like the mouth of a hungry monster, ready to swallow them whole. Jake gripped his restraints and tried to prepare himself for impact. But nothing could have prepared him for the violence of the crash. The ship hit the surface at an angle, bounced once, twice, then carved a furrow through the icy ground that seemed to go on forever. Jake felt his ribs crack as his restraints bit deep into his chest, his head snapping back and forth as the world became a spinning blur of metal and sparks and screaming. When the grinding, tearing, impossibly loud noise finally stopped, the silence was almost worse. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red. Jake blinked, trying to clear his vision, and looked around the wreckage of what had been their classroom just minutes before. The neat rows of seats were now twisted metal and broken equipment. Pieces of the hull were scattered around like deadly confetti, and his classmates, THOK, lay motionless against a bulkhead. His rocky exterior cracked like someone had hit a statue with a sledgehammer. Yellow fluid was leaking from between the cracks, and Jake realized with horror that it was probably Thok's version of blood. Kree's environmental suit was sparking and hissing, yellow smoke pouring from damaged seals. His reptilian features were slack and unconscious behind his helmet's visor. Yith's containment field was flickering like a broken light bulb, her gaseous form barely holding together. Half the students weren't moving at all. Environmental systems failing, the ship's computer announced with the same mechanical calm it might use to report the weather. Toxic atmosphere breach detected. Hull integrity compromised in multiple sections. Life support operating at 30% capacity. Jake tried to move and gasped as pain shot through his chest. Definitely broken ribs. But he was conscious, and he was breathing, and right now that made him one of the lucky ones. Estimated Survival time in current conditions. The computer continued. 14 minutes. 14 minutes. Jake looked around at his injured classmates and felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the failing life support. 14 minutes to live, and he was the only one still moving. Jake took a deep breath and immediately regretted it. The sharp pain in his chest reminded him that at least 2 ribs were broken, maybe 3. But pain was just information, and right now the information was telling him he was still alive enough to do something about their situation. He fumbled with his restraint buckles, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Around him, the few students who were still conscious sat in their seats like they were waiting for someone else to fix everything. Their environmental suits beeped constantly, displaying warning messages and countdown timers that nobody wanted to look at too closely. "We need to get to the emergency shelter," Jake announced, pushing himself to his feet. Every movement sent sharp spikes of pain through his torso, but he gritted his teeth and moved anyway. The ship's computer said there should be one about 200 meters from our crash site. He stumbled over to Thok, who was slumped against what used to be a wall, but was now more like abstract metal art. Jake pressed 2 fingers against the big alien's throat, feeling for a pulse. Thok's skin felt like warm stone, but there it was, a steady, thrumming heartbeat, slower than a human's, but strong. "Still alive," Jake muttered, "but we need to move him." "Are you completely insane?" Yeth's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, her gaseous form flickering like a broken hologram. "The atmosphere outside will kill us in seconds. The methane concentration alone would dissolve our lungs." Jake was already moving, grabbing Thok under the arms and trying to figure out how to lift someone who probably weighed as much as a small car. "Not all of us." "What do you mean, not all of us?" Kree wheezed from across the wreckage. The lizard-like alien was conscious but clearly in bad shape. His suit was making alarming hissing sounds, and yellow fluid, his blood, Jake realized, was pooling under his seat. Jake didn't answer immediately. He was too busy trying to drag Thok toward what remained of the emergency airlock. The rocky alien was incredibly heavy, and Jake's broken ribs screamed in protest with every step, but he kept moving, 1 foot in front of the other. That's all. "It took your suits damaged too." Kree pointed with a shaking claw at Jake's helmet. "Look at your visor. There's a crack running from your temple to your jaw. That should have killed you already." Jake glanced down at his suit's display. Sure enough, his environmental readings were all over the place. Atmospheric pressure was dropping, oxygen levels were fluctuating wildly, and his temperature regulation was completely shot. According to every safety protocol he'd learned, he should have been dead 5 minutes ago. "Yeah, I noticed," Jake said casually, like they were discussing the weather instead of his imminent death. "But I'm not dead yet, so let's work with what we've got." He managed to get Thok to the airlock, which was damaged, but still functional. The inner door was stuck, so Jake braced his feet against the wall and pulled until something in his shoulder made a popping sound that probably wasn't good. But the door opened. "Jake, you can't go out there," Yith pleaded. "Even if the cold doesn't kill you, the methane will eat through your suit in minutes, and the electrical storms, ... Jake was already sealing Thok into the airlock's emergency stretcher. "Someone has to. You're all too hurt to move, and I'm the only one still functioning." "Functioning?" Kree laughed, a bitter sound that turned into a coughing fit. "Your suit is failing. Your life support is compromised. How are you even standing?" But Jake was already cycling through the airlock. The outer door opened with a hiss. That sounded like the moon itself, sighing, and Jake got his first real look at the surface of Kepler-44 to see. It was like stepping into hell's freezer. The methane storms raged overhead, orange and red clouds churning with electrical fury. The ground was covered in a thin layer of frozen methane that crunched under his boots like deadly snow. Every breath he took sent visible puffs of vapor into the toxic air, and he could feel the cold seeping through his damaged suit like liquid. Jake started walking, dragging the stretcher behind him. Each step was agony, his ribs grinding together, his shoulders screaming where he'd popped it, getting the door open, and the cold slowly creeping through his suit to freeze his exposed skin. But he kept walking. The emergency shelter was exactly where the ship's computer had said it would be, a small dome rising from the moon's surface like a metallic igloo. Jake got Doc inside, then turned around and walked back through the killing cold for Cree. "This is impossible," Cree whispered, as Jake hauled him through the methane storms. "The atmospheric readings, the temperature, you should be dead." Jake's legs were starting to go numb, and ice crystals were forming on his face where the helmet seal had failed completely. But he kept walking. Back to the ship for Yith's containment unit, then for the unconscious butterfly creature whose name he'd never learned, then for Professor Glix, whose tentacles had gone rigid with cold shock. With each trip, Jake moved a little slower. His movements became more mechanical, like a robot running on failing batteries. Ice formed on his eyebrows and in his hair. His damaged suit beeped constantly with warnings about hypothermia, atmospheric poisoning, and system failures. But he never stopped. The other students, who were still conscious, watched through the shelter's small windows in growing amazement and horror as Jake made trip after trip through conditions that should have been instantly lethal. His suit was more hole than protection now. His face was blue with cold, and every step looked like it might be his last. But he kept coming back. On his final trip, carrying the last injured student, Jake's legs finally gave out about 10 meters. From the shelter door, he fell to his knees in the frozen methane, his passenger sliding off his shoulder. For a moment, he just knelt there, breathing hard, looking like he might not get up again. Then he crawled, dragging the injured student behind him. Jake crawled the last 10 meters on his hands and knees, leaving a trail in the toxic ice, when he finally sealed the shelter door behind him. Every alien student inside stared at him like he was something from a nightmare. Jake slumped against the wall, breathing heavily, his face covered in frost and his suit hanging in tatters. "That should have killed you," Cree gasped, his yellow eyes wide with disbelief. "The cold alone should have stopped your heart. The methane exposure should have dissolved your lungs. The electrical storms. How are you still alive?" Jake looked up at his classmates, all of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from AW to terror. He managed a tired smile, the same easy grin he'd worn when they first met him 3 weeks ago. "Give me a minute to catch my breath," he said, "and I'll tell you." Jake sat with his back against the shelter wall, finally allowing himself to feel how much everything hurt. His ribs sent sharp pains through his chest with every breath. His shoulder throbbed where he'd wrenched it open, getting that door unstuck. And he was pretty sure he had frostbite on at least 3 fingers. But he was alive. They were all alive. And the shelter's life support was working perfectly. The cramped emergency shelter was about the size of a large closet, designed to keep a small research team alive for a few days while waiting for rescue. With 8 injured students crammed inside, it felt more like a very uncomfortable elevator ride that might last for hours. Jake opened the first aid kit mounted on the wall and started checking on his classmates. Thok was conscious now, though his rocky skin showed stress fractures that leaked that yellow fluid Jake had learned was his blood. Kree's suit had finally stopped sparking, but the lizard-like alien was clearly in pain from whatever internal injuries the crash had given him. "Let me see that arm," Jake said to Professor Glix, whose tentacles had started moving again as he warmed up. One of them was bent at an angle that definitely wasn't natural. "You should not be taking care of us," Professor Glix protested weakly. "You are the most severely injured here. Your exposure to the atmospheric conditions." "I'm fine," Jake said, automatically. The same thing he'd been saying his whole life whenever anyone expressed concern about his well-being. He gently examined the professor's injured tentacle. "Looks like a simple fracture." The first aid kit has some basic splinting material. As Jake worked, bandaging wounds and checking for concussions, the alien students watched him with expressions he'd never seen before. It wasn't the dismissive amusement or casual disregard they'd shown him for the past 3 weeks. This was something entirely different. They were looking at him like he was dangerous. "Your species classification must be wrong," Thok rumbled, his voice weak but filled with amazement. "The Galactic database lists Earth as a Class 3 paradise world. Mild climate, abundant resources, no major environmental threats. You can't be from a place like that." Jake paused in the middle of wrapping a bandage around Yith's damaged containment field generator. He looked up at Thok, then at the other students, and started to laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh or a sarcastic one. It was genuine amusement, the kind of laugh you make when someone tells you something so wrong it's funny. "Paradise." Jake shook his head, grinning. "Earth. You think Earth is paradise?" He reached into his suit's utility pocket and pulled out a small device that projected holographic images. His fingers were still numb from the cold, but he managed to activate it and bring up a 3-dimensional image of his home planet. "Let me tell you about Earth," Jake said. The blue and green world spinning slowly in the air above his palm looked peaceful enough. White clouds drifted over vast oceans and green continents. From space, it did look like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. "This is what we call the Chicxulub impact," Jake said, manipulating the hologram to show a massive asteroid slamming into the planet. 66 million years ago, a rock the size of a mountain hit Earth, moving at about 20 kilometers per second. The explosion was bigger than every nuclear weapon ever built, going off at the same time. The alien students watched in stunned silence as the hologram showed the devastation that followed. Massive tsunamis, global fires, and clouds of debris that blocked out the sun for months. It killed about 75% of all life on the planet, Jake continued casually, including the dinosaurs. But life kept going. It always does on Earth. But that was millions of years ago, Yith protested. "Surely your modern era has been more stable." Jake laughed again and changed the holographic display. "This is the Toba Supta volcano. It erupted about 70,000 years ago, right when early humans were starting to spread across the planet. The ash cloud blocked out the sun for 6 years. Global temperatures dropped by 10 degrees. It almost wiped out our entire species." The hologram showed a volcanic winter that made the surface of Kepler 442c look comfortable by comparison. Ice covered most of the planet, and what little sunlight got through the ash clouds was weak and gray. "We think the entire human population dropped to maybe 10,000 people," Jake said. 10,000 humans left in the whole world. But we survived. We adapted. We kept going. That's just 2 examples. Cree wheezed, though his yellow eyes were wide with growing understanding. "Surely most of your planet's history has been peaceful." "Oh, that's just getting started," Jake said cheerfully, changing the holographic display again. "Ice ages that lasted for millions of years. Volcanic eruptions that created toxic clouds covering entire continents. Plagues that killed half the population of Europe. Earthquakes that leveled entire cities. Hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts." The images kept changing, showing disaster after disaster. Each one would have been an extinction-level event on most worlds. But on Earth, life just kept adapting and surviving. "We evolved during the Pleistocene epoch," Jake explained. 2 million years of ice ages, droughts, floods, and megafauna trying to eat us. Saber-toothed cats, cave bears, giant wolves, short-faced bears that stood 12 feet tall. Everything on our planet was trying to kill us, including the planet itself. Jake flexed his hands, and the alien students could see ice crystals still, glittering on his knuckles where his suit had failed completely. His skin should have been black with frostbite, but it was just slightly blue and already warming back to normal color. The only humans who survived to reproduce were the ones too stubborn to die when everything around them said they should. For 2 million years, natural selection weeded out anyone who couldn't handle the impossible. But the methane yith, whispered the exposure to toxic atmosphere. How did you survive that? Jake grinned and pulled up another image. Ever heard of the Berenja land bridge? About 15,000 years ago, my ancestors decided they wanted to see what was on the other side of the world, so they walked across a frozen wasteland for thousands of miles, in temperatures that would make this place look tropical. The hologram showed small groups of humans trudging across an endless expanse of ice and snow, hunting mammoths and surviving in conditions that would kill most galactic species in minutes. And methane, Jake continued. We've got bacteria in our guts that process compounds your species would consider toxic waste. We eat things that would poison most aliens. Our bodies are full of chemicals that would be considered industrial solvents on other worlds. Kree's vertical pupils dilated as he stared at Jake. Your world isn't a paradise. It's a death trap. One of the worst in the galaxy, Jake agreed cheerfully. Constant natural disasters, toxic atmosphere in some places, deadly weather, predators that evolved specifically to hunt us, diseases that jump from species to species, and a rotation that gives us day and night cycles that mess with our sleep patterns just enough to keep us slightly crazy all the time. He leaned back against the wall, wincing as his broken ribs reminded him they were still broken. That's why we're so hard to kill. Earth spent millions of years trying to wipe us out, and we just got more stubborn every time. The shelter was completely silent except for the hum of life support systems. The alien students stared at Jake with a mixture of awe and terror, finally understanding what they were really looking at. Not a weak creature from a paradise world, but an apex survivor, from a planet that specialized in creating the impossible. The rescue ship found them 18 hours later, and by then the story had already started spreading through the Academy's communication networks. The rescue team consisted of military-grade medics from 3 different species, all of whom took one look at Jake's readings and immediately assumed their equipment was malfunctioning. These numbers can't be right. The lead medic, an insect-like being with 4 arms, muttered as he ran scanner after scanner over Jake's body. According to this, you were exposed to lethal atmospheric conditions for over an hour. Your suit failed completely. You should be dead. Yeah, I keep hearing that, Jake said from his spot on the medical transport. He was finally letting himself feel tired now that everyone was safe. But I'm not. So maybe your definition of lethal needs some work. Word spread through the Academy faster than Jake had thought possible. By the time their transport docked with the Academy's medical bay, half the student body was crowding the observation decks to get a look at the human who shouldn't have survived. Jake spent 2 days in the medical center while doctors from dozens of different species ran every test they could think of. They took blood samples, tissue samples, bone density scans, brain activity monitors, and genetic analysis. The results left them more confused than when they started. Your cellular structure shows damage consistent with severe hypothermia, Dr. Yex explained, her crystalline form chiming softly as she moved. But your cells are already repairing themselves at a rate we've never seen before. And your blood chemistry. It's like your body just shrugged off what should have been fatal poisoning. Humans are tough, Jake said with a shrug. We've had to be. When he was finally released from the medical bay, Jake discovered that his life at the Academy had changed completely. Students who had barely acknowledged his existence before now stopped their conversations when he walked by. The hallways seemed to part in front of him like he was some kind of celebrity, but it wasn't the good kind of celebrity status. Jake was eating breakfast in the mess hall when Thox sat down across from him. The big rocky alien moved carefully, still recovering from his injuries, but he was healing well. The stress fractures in his skin had sealed up, leaving only faint lines like old scars. The Academy board wants to reclassify Earth, Thox said without any greeting. His voice was quieter than usual, more respectful. From a Class 3 Paradise world to a Class 12 Death world. Jake paused with his spoon halfway to his mouth. Class 12 was the highest danger rating in the galactic classification system. It was reserved for worlds so hostile that even visiting them required special authorization and military-grade equipment. "About time," Jake replied, not looking up from his breakfast. "We kept telling you guys Earth was dangerous, but nobody listened." He took another bite and noticed that the usual chatter of the mess hall had died down. Jake looked up to find dozens of alien students watching him eat with expressions ranging from fascination to barely controlled fear. They were staring like he was some kind of exotic predator that might do something unpredictable at any moment. "Is it true?" asked a small furry creature from the Proxima delegation, her voice barely above a whisper, "that your people actually choose to jump out of flying vehicles for entertainment?" Jake blinked. "Skydiving. Sure, it's fun. Great way to spend a weekend." A collective shudder ran through the assembled aliens. Several students pushed back from their tables and found reasons to be somewhere else. "But why?" pressed another student, this one looking like a walking plant. "Why would anyone choose to fall from a great height with only a thin fabric to prevent death?" "Because it's exciting," Jake said, genuinely confused by their reaction. "The adrenaline rush, the view, the challenge of it. Don't you have anything like that on your worlds?" The plant creature's leaves rustled with what Jake was learning to recognize as horror. "Our recreational activities focus on safe, educational experiences. Art appreciation, historical study, meditative contemplation. That sounds..." Jake paused, trying to think of a polite way to say, "incredibly boring. Peaceful." More students were leaving now. Jake noticed that the ones who remained were sitting farther away from his table than usual. Even Cree, who had become something like a friend over the past few weeks, was keeping his distance. "Jake," Thock said carefully, "can you tell us about other human recreational activities?" Jake shrugged. "Sure, let's see. There's rock climbing, where you scale vertical cliff faces with just your hands and some rope. Whitewater rafting, where you ride rapids that could smash you against rocks. Deep sea diving, where you go underwater so far that the pressure could crush you if your equipment fails. Motorcycle racing, car racing, horse racing." With each activity he mentioned, more students left the mess hall. By the time he got to explaining what humans called extreme sports, only Thock and a few of the most fascinated aliens remained. "Your species actively seeks out dangerous situations," observed a student that looked like a living crystal formation. "For pleasure." "Yeah," Jake said, finishing his breakfast. "Life's too short to play it safe all the time." The crystal being made a sound like breaking glass, which Jake had learned was how his species expressed disbelief. After breakfast, Jake found a message waiting for him in his personal communications. It was from the Academy's administrative office, marked with the highest priority flags. The message was brief, but significant. Earth's exchange program had been expanded. 12 more human students were being fast-tracked through the Academy's selection process. The previous waiting list of 3 years had been reduced to 3 months. The Academy board wanted more humans, and they wanted them soon. Jake grinned as he read the official notification. The galaxy was finally starting to understand what humans had always known about themselves. They were survivors. They were the species that looked at impossible odds and decided to try anyway. They were, as his grandfather used to say, the cockroaches of the cosmos, and proud of it. Later that day, he got a call from his parents back on Earth. His mother was crying, which wasn't unusual. His father was trying to act casual, which was, "So we heard about your little adventure," his dad said, his voice carefully neutral. "Crashed on a hostile alien world, saved your entire class, survived conditions that should have killed you. Just another Tuesday for a Morrison, right?" Jake laughed. "Something like that." "How's the selection process going for the new exchange students?" "Well," his mother said, wiping her eyes, "let's just say the Academy's new requirements are very different from the old ones. They're not looking for the smartest or the most diplomatic anymore. What are they looking for?" His father's grin was audible through the communication link. "The most stubbornly, impossibly, aggressively human humans they can find." Jake looked out his dormitory window at the Academy's crystal spires and the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, 12 more humans were packing their bags and preparing to show the galaxy what Earth's children were really made of. The next semester was going to be very interesting indeed.